Impact Teams Radio. Welcome to Impact Teams Radio, the show where we explore what it takes to be a leader of the leaders in corporate America. Get ready to be inspired and discover proven tips for going from average to exceptional. Now, here's your host and guide, Tony Sherman.
Hello and welcome to another Impact Teams Radio. I'm your host and guide, Tony Sherman. As you know, this is a show for leaders who want to be leaders of leaders. And today we're very, very fortunate because you know that the two things that I'm really intrigued with for my personal growth in this show are virtual team management, because I think virtual teams are going to be a reality for leaders in the 21st century and beyond. And then the other thing I'm very interested in is coaching. So we've had some really good coaching sessions, but I was very fortunate to stumble across our current guest, Dave Vanz, who works for a company called Intego. Dave, am I pronouncing that right, Intego?
Yep, Intego Group.
So actually, now you're on the line, Dave. First of all, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me, Tony.
Pleasure. And Dave wrote a great article on LinkedIn, which, as everyone knows, that's where I do my leadership reading. The 7 ways to build trust in your virtual employees. Now, that instantly resonated with me. I thought, this is a man, read the article, I need to talk to him and share his thoughts with you guys. So, Dave, thanks again for being on the show.
Oh, thank you.
And why don't I step away from the mic for a few seconds and just ask you to introduce yourselves to our listeners.
Okay. My name is Dave Vanz, as Tony said. I am the sales and marketing manager at a company in Orlando called Intego Group. Intego Group offers the opportunity for businesses to build virtual teams overseas by leveraging our HR managed captive centers. So, is that all you needed?
That's fine. So
okay.
Actually, yes, because I'm going to unpack your life in the next 20 minutes. So, so Dave, what sort of sports do you do? Do you have a family? You know, what's the non-work side of Dave Vanz?
Oh, the normal side. Been married for 12 years now. I have 2 boys, 11 and 5. Our family grew up in Michigan. My wife and I grew up in Michigan. My oldest son was there for a while as well. But in 2010, we moved down to Orlando to start something new. And, but we're a family that's very heavily involved in community. We love serving in the area. We love connecting with people. It's been something that, moving down here with the nicer weather, we really get to enjoy the outdoors more. We play a lot of outdoor sports. Our kids they're at that time of their age where they're trying out every single sport to figure out which one they like the most. We're a very highly extroverted family outside of my oldest son, who's introverted. The poor child has to live with us. But very much on the go, high energy family. Just love connecting with people.
Excellent. So I can imagine that I've got 3 boys, but I had them 2 years apart. Well, actually, my wife did all the hard work. But with 2 boys aged 5 and 11, that's quite a large gap, isn't it?
It is. Thankfully, we have that. Our first son has that firstborn syndrome where he's just easy. He listens. He's not the crazy, ADD child that you envision some boys to be. He's very responsible. So he's been a huge help for us when it comes to, taking on some of the responsibilities of having a 5-year-old. Like, for instance, this is summer vacation, and so we just moved to a new neighborhood, and it happens to be that there's no kids on our street yet. Now, they're still yet to start school this coming Monday, so they haven't really met anybody yet. So they have been tied to the hip, playing outside, playing in the house, doing everything. And I can't imagine what it would be like if it was any different. But my oldest son is, he's really just embraced, taking care of him, leading him. It's been really cool to see.
That's brilliant. Yeah, and you're right. An oldest child who does that. My oldest son was the same thing. In fact, to the point where my wife's an oldest child, I'm an oldest child. So with my oldest child, we knew the pressures we would put on him naturally as parents. So once a month, we used to have what we call oldest child's meal, and we'd take him out for a treat just for the oldest child as a treat, because we knew that he would do all those mini parenting roles. And he really appreciated it. And the funny thing was, as the boys grew up, they started to get a bit jealous, and we'd say, okay, you can have the oldest child's meal this month if you take his responsibilities. Within 2 or 3 days, they'd always be like, Dad, I don't want to be the oldest child. It's too much hard work. I have to do everything.
I love that,
yeah.
though. I love that. I love hearing how other people raise their kids. You know, that's how, we're all kind of winging it, aren't we, in some way? But I love hearing how people will do things for their kids. I know, like, I have brothers-in-law that have daughters, and they take their daughters out for dates and stuff like that. And, I love hearing how people raise their kids because it gives me ideas, and it makes me look like a hero. So thanks for that.
Oh, my pleasure. And seriously, when it comes to raising children or it comes to leadership, there are no set manuals. Somebody I was interviewing who has a phenomenal leadership arc himself, Martin Plumley, he said that one of the reasons he likes leadership is nobody's ever cracked the human code. There's always something to learn.
Always. And
yeah.
every person is different. You know, it's one of the things that I had, I'm always trying to just think of different ways. You know, I'm in the people business. That's the way I look at it. Whether it's sales or marketing, I'm in the business of trying to connect with people. I've run my own company, and, I've had to be behind the scenes and thinking, am I the person who motivates them? Am I the person, that will get them going, which that never really succeeds. I mean, you can be motivational, but it's ultimately their decision. There were 3 things that I discovered that I started actually testing out at our church in helping volunteers find the areas in which they would serve. And, for church, when you're serving at a church, you're not getting paid for that. So if it ends up feeling like a job, most people will eventually burn out or they just won't do it at all. And so I would sit down and I started meeting with some of the people. I met with some of the youth groups that were at the church. I met with some of the older leaders. And I've done this with a couple people who have also tried to start up jobs to understand where they fit in the business. And the 3 areas that I looked at were passion, knowledge, and gifts. And I'd sit there. One of my favorite things in the world is, have you ever seen, they sit on an easel typically, but like you get those big paper boards and you see people doing presentations on them and they write on them and they flip the sheet over and they write on another sheet. Well, they have these at Staples and they're like sticky notes. So for those of you that have seen that, I love these things. They're bleed through proof. You can stick them to the walls, and I oftentimes, when I use it for when I'm mind mapping out a strategy for marketing, and I look like, my wife calls me a mad scientist because I'll come home, or she'll come home and she'll see our walls I take down frames off the wall, and she'll come home and you'll see this mind map larger than life sitting on our living room wall. And she goes, oh boy, like he's back at it trying to figure things out. But I'd sit down and I'd give everyone a sheet of paper and I would say, all right, there's 3 areas, passion, knowledge, and gifts. I want you to write out these 3 areas of your life. And I would define it as, your passion, this is something that you would do for free. This is something that wakes you up at 5 o'clock in the morning when you're someone who prefers to sleep until 10. This is something, so I kind of describe passion that way. And then knowledge is something that you've learned. It wasn't, like the other one is a gift. This is something that you've learned. You've learned it through, a book. You've learned it through, a class. You've learned it through just learning from someone else. But it's knowledge. You weren't born with it. This is just something you've learned. And then the other thing is list out the things that are your gifts. What are your gifts? This is the thing that people hate you for. You were born with it. And, you see 6-year-olds that come on stage and they sing like opera singers. How do they do that? I don't know. I wasn't born that way. and I will not test out my singing on the show today. But, what are your gifts? And what's interesting is I give them each, usually anywhere between, 8 to 12 minutes to write out. So there's not a lot of time to think about everything. You just try to write it out and get all your thoughts down on paper. And what's interesting, and I don't know if this is just something that I see, but when I look at the papers, I can immediately start seeing inside of a person. I can start seeing who they are and where they fit in. You can even see it beyond what they write down. It's sometimes how they write. You ever seen a person who doesn't, one of my biggest tasks has always been administration, organizing administration and maintaining that. But it's the way they write, you can see some of them will take time to draw like I've seen girls write little hearts over the eyes, and everything looks beautiful and it's laid out nicely. And then you have someone who's writing a sentence out and it's moving like a roller coaster up and down, through the paper, and they're writing bigger, then they're writing smaller, and you can see who's more organized, who's like more creative. But you also get a look into seeing how their knowledge and their gifts and their passions fit. And I started testing it out at church because people were volunteering. But what's interesting is that also fits into, I did it with my wife and kids, just to kind of see where they are and who they are. I've done it with work as well, where there's people, at the office, where do they fit in? Yes, they're getting paid to do their job, but what's motivating them, and where can they take their superpower and bring it to the office?
That's brilliant. I mean, and as a leader, we can do that with our teams, and again, one of the things we've covered a number of times in the last few months is the idea of doing like the Myers-Briggs profiling and so forth. But what you've said is a leader can do something that helps profile their team, shows them their strengths and weaknesses, and shows where they may best fit into the team without having to worry about a Myers-Briggs. You can do it in a half-an-hour meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I like that a lot.
And they like it too. And I always start the meeting too, like where we sit around a table, and I've got Legos sitting in the middle of the table and candy bars. And, I picked that up from someone else who had walked us through a big vision meeting. We were talking about opening up, a group of us were looking at opening up an entrepreneurial university. And, this was a few years ago, and we sat down with somebody who was, who had already been successful and had a lot of, great vision towards, businesses and the way they're led. And we sat down, and I love that he opened up the meeting with more of a playful setting. There was, I think, little dumpster trucks, on the table, and there was candy, and there was Legos. And I'm going, that's awesome, And so being able to tap into people's creativity and, getting them to start thinking and feeling comfortable, it's amazing when you take the time to invest in people like that, how you can find out where they fit and how that ends up benefiting whatever it is that you're doing, whether it's volunteer work or business or where they actually fit in, and it gets them excited about it as well.
Actually, a light bulb went off in my head when you said that, and it's not just a fun way to start a meeting. Now, the thing is, I deal a lot with virtual teams, and that's hard to do that. But if you've got an on-site, then not only is it fun and people think it's creative and they're in the room, if you will, it stops people from multitasking on their laptops or their phones. If you think about it
Absolutely.
For a second, it's actually very powerful, isn't it?
That is. I never thought about that. That's true.
Okay, I think we're done, David. You're off the hook.
Oh
no,
wait.
That was no. Stay. I may get another gem like that. So we haven't even started the interview, and already we've got a great I love that. I'm just like, I've got notes all over the place. I've just written dump truck, and at some point I'm going to have to remember what that is. So let me ask at least one interview question before we get to the end of the session. So share with us, if you will, over your leadership development, one or two really good, solid, strong wins that you've had, why you're proud of them, and what that taught you about leadership.
See, how many crash and burns did I have?
Well, we'll start with a win. I was more thinking about the Chicago MySpace thing that you and I were discussing the other day.
Chicago? How dare you? Now the interview's over.
Detroit.
Yeah. Come on now.
I rescued me before you did.
This interview has now ended. No, the two wins that I think would stand out. One, for me, I've always enjoyed trying something new, doing something different. That's always been thrilling to me. Going against the grain isn't the norm. It's easier to go with the grain and go with the flow and hop on the train that everyone else is on. That's not exciting to me. And eventually that kind of leaves me, bored in what I'm doing. Even as a kid, that usually actually got me into trouble as a kid. As an adult, you don't get in trouble, but you deal with your consequences. So the two wins that I had was in 2002. I'll kind of paint the picture here, and I'll get to the win. In 2002, my wife and I had just gotten married, and we found out, hey, we did everything quick. We bought a house, and we found out she was pregnant, all within 2002. And a couple weeks after that, we found out about the pregnancy and that we got the house, I lost my job. And my performance was good. I would probably tie it up a little bit more political reasons, but I was in a position where I was stuck. And I thought to myself, I'm like, I don't ever want that to happen again. I don't ever want to be in a position where I lose a job that I was performing well at. And so I started to look into starting up a marketing company. Marketing is I've always felt natural with it. And so I began to hone my skills in marketing. I started writing out a business plan. And in 2003, I had another job at that point, but I ended up being able to leave it because I landed a client that allowed me to go full-time into it. Still some risk going into it, obviously, but I had a full-time client that allowed me to do that. And so launching my own company, having a location in a small town in Rochester, Michigan, on Main Street, strategically located a couple of buildings down from Starbucks, and that was a huge win. It was scary, but that was my thrill. I loved being in that moment and knowing that it now depends on me, and now I can go the way I want to go, and that was really fun. The second win was in 2006. Okay, back to training up a little bit. During the time when I was doing my marketing company, I started in 2002 venturing down to Detroit taking pictures. And I was getting into photography, and I was taking pictures of the building. And I think I went downtown Detroit because that's where everyone really didn't go. And I was fascinated by the big city. But everyone, for the most part, when they traveled to downtown Detroit at that time, it was to go to a Tigers or Red Wings game, and other than that, they just didn't go. And so on a Saturday morning, I would travel down there, and I'd start taking pictures, and I started meeting some of the people that were working on buildings. For the most part, the entire town was a ghost town. It was really strange and fascinating all at the same time because you could stand in the middle of the road and you wouldn't get hit by a car. And so I would walk around, and I ended up falling in love with the city. I fell in love with it. I met bartenders in restaurants, and we sat down and chatted about, what was life like. Some of them lived downtown in Boston. I got to see some of the lofts that were down there, and it was just this dream come true for me. I always tell my wife, I said, at this point in time, if we didn't have kids, we'd be living in a loft downtown somewhere. But I fell in love with the city, and I began to realize that a lot of the things that I had heard about the city, about being dangerous and not wanting to go down there, weren't all very true. And, Detroit gets a lot of bad press, but this is a time when Detroit wasn't the cool thing. It wasn't the hip thing to be a part of. But in 2004, I discovered MySpace. And in 2005, we loved the concept of the social network, but we just didn't like the network. It took 10 minutes to download a page because of all the glitter gifs that everyone was adding on there. But we wanted to bring it more towards a local feel. And I called it killing the ignorance. How do we get people down to Detroit and partake in the great things that are down there? And so we launched the social network based around music and entertainment and culture. And we built it from the ground up. I worked with the guys at our marketing company. After hours, we built this thing. This is a time, remember that, social media really wasn't there yet. And, you couldn't just go online and find free code. So we had to build this from the ground up. And we ended up launching in 2006. And this is also around the same time that Mashable had started, Mashable.com. It was a social media news site. And they deemed us at that time as the first social network to exist for a city. We started pushing it out there. We were talking about, kind of leveraging the old Motown type of idea that music in Detroit is fantastic, which it is. And we began to push ourselves into promoting, the city. We promoted all of Metro Detroit, but we focused highly on the city. And we worked with Vanz, and it was one of those, I went from running a marketing company to all of a sudden owning a social network and being able to be a part of the city and, what I would see as the revitalization of the city, like helping encourage people to come down. That was a huge win. And that journey, getting to that point and the journey of being a part of that was, it was a course in leadership. It was a course in adversity. It really allowed me to test my abilities as someone to fight for something that in some ways was bigger than me, but be a part of something that was also fresh and new at a time when, the only people using social media at the time seemed like 17-year-old kids, and music bands.
That's amazing. So, believe it or not, we're already out of time here, David.
Oh.
So let me ask you, if you were to give our leaders one or two insightful lessons on leadership that you learned in that period, what would they be?
I would say one, serving your community. The best part about business is when you stir the pot. When you stir the pot, things happen. You put things in motion. And it's more than just going to work. It's being a part of your job, but also serving in the community. You never know. You will meet leaders who serve in their community. And those leaders, those are past that. You can't describe it because it's like a web. It's a network. You start meeting other leaders, and when you meet other leaders, your network grows. And if your network is growing, then your business is growing, your leadership is growing. I would say also, if you're a family man, family. When I took on a mentor, I found a new mentor actually last year. I'd asked somebody, will you mentor me? And when I got on the phone with them and I asked can you help me? Because we were in similar industries. And the first thing he brought up was, how's your family life? I'm like, great. So how about sales and marketing? And we'll get there. How's your family life? And it really kind of pushed me back a little bit to not be so gung-ho. And it's a little bit different than the way I was thinking, but having the support of your family, especially when you're working hard and you're out there at your job, having the support of your family and taking care of those that love you and want you to have, the best in life, that goes a long way. I don't know if those are two of the best, but those are the first things that popped in my head.
Actually, I think they're very powerful. I like the idea of being a servant leader in the community as a naturally empowering process, and then taking care of those who serve you behind the scenes. That's just smart leadership, and also if you're a leader of integrity, it's the right thing to do. And ultimately, why do we go to work? We don't, we go to work to, one, grow, but also to provide for our family. So if we don't put them first, what are we doing it for again?
Right.
So, Dave, we're out of time. So we didn't even touch on some of the stuff that I really want to talk to you about, the innovations that you guys are doing with capture centers. Can we come back and do another episode and discuss those in some deeper depth, please?
Definitely would love to do that.
Excellent, excellent. So, Impact Nation, you've heard some great ideas here. We've had a lot of fun. I love the idea of the Legos and the dump truck. Definitely going to be taking that into my work practice. Hope you've got some good big ideas here. And until next week, this is Tony Sherman with Impact Team Radios. Have a great week. God bless.
That's it for this week. Thank you for listening. Now go and apply these few gems. Make the wisdom you have heard your own. If you want to be part of our launch success, then please go to impactteamsradio.com/love and tell the world. If you want more and never want to miss a beat, please go to impactteamsradio.com/subscribe. If you have 3 minutes, we would love to see a positive review on iTunes. And until next time, remember to act on what you've learned, and you'll be ahead of most of the world. Impact Teams Radio.